in general. Yeah, so first of all, my name is Miguel. I'm the CTO, co-founder of Lucidity. I'll be moderating this panel about cryptography and AdTech. So with that, let's get started. So first, can we do some introductions? I know you already kind of introduced yourself, but yeah. But Daniel, if you could just do an introduction.
Hello, Daniel Arnold. I'm the CTO of AdNode. I wrote the platform and did all the blockchain work and the smart contracts and the ad delivery validation piece and all that we do. And our technology, our company is rather small, so kind of a one-man show on the technology side at the company.
Awesome.
Keyman Insurance.
Cool. Thanks. All right, let's get started. So cryptography and AdTech. So first, let's start with a kind of a status of today. So could you guys maybe discuss and talk about how cryptography is used in AdTech today? Some examples. I know we know about AdTech and AdCert. And what are your thoughts about currently how that's used, how cryptography is used in AdTech today, or not used in AdTech?
Okay. Good question. Well, we're a very new industry. There's AdNode, there's Lucidity, and you've got Neil up here, right? And all of the bigger companies, they're currently employing tests right now. So that's kind of where we are in this space for 2019. There's a lot of testing going on. Everything from ad buying to content delivery, which for me is kind of interesting, the democratization of content delivery, where you don't necessarily have a single distributor of it, and they can get paid, and that's something that is pretty radical use of blockchain, which is why I like it.
But more specifically, like without blockchain, like just remove the element of blockchain. I'm talking about like today in AdTech, in OpenRTB, or in privacy. Kind of give me your thoughts of the status of cryptography. So for example, there's AdCert, which is being, it's coming out. But even like AdTxt, for example, I think privacy there's a huge problem. I think where it's not being used, right? So I would love to know like kind of your insights and your thoughts about that, how cryptography is actually not being used today for any of this privacy. So as that goes up the chain, yeah.
Yeah, that's an easier question to answer. So we still don't have, for DNS, for instance, we still don't have encrypted DNS. That's supposed to be coming soon, something that I wish we had a long time ago. Also, wouldn't it be nice if our cookies were all encrypted, such that third parties couldn't read them? Those are the two primary examples that I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is like it's super siloed. There's no real incentive, I would say, for the big companies to change this way. I mean, they're sitting on top of an architecture that is 10 years old, 20 years old. Everything is interconnected with those systems. So to kind of pivot off of that is not trivial. I think that creates an enormous opportunity for new companies, lots of which are in this room today, where they're actually starting with a clean slate, and they're either addressing real RTB, they are looking at privacy, with a completely, with a complete blank slate. I think that creates an interesting opportunity. But as it relates to privacy, like it's really, really small. I don't see really anybody kind of doing that. But I do think that that's the next big emerging chain.
What's your opinion? Do you think that it's better that we use cryptography to kind of pass user data around, or that the user data should never even leave the device? Perhaps you don't even need cryptography for that, or you apply it differently.
Yeah, I think we just talked about this, right? Like, so I think if you asked me this sort of a year ago, I was adamant that the actual data needed to stay on the device, primarily because I thought that was the best way to secure it. And I felt that was the foundation from which a user could jump off. So if you decided to OAuth into a platform, decided to authenticate, decided to sell data, doing that from your own control was the best spot. I think as we've sort of evolved, we've seen some interesting models as to whether or not that necessarily has to be the case. I think it's still pretty early to say, but one of the big things for me as it relates to data is we have this pervasive issue as it relates to security. So stepping away from AdTech for a second is that if you hold a giant database full of valuable data, like you're going to get hacked. Like that's just the reality. And so collectively, this industry, all industries needs to solve that. To me, one of the ways we looked at it was, all right, well, if you distribute it at the device level by individual, as a byproduct of that, don't you actually solve security? Our feeling is yes, we feel that, but where it goes from here, open to debate.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, just to kind of opine there. I definitely think like things like even that we're not even realizing that we're using cryptography today. So things like HTTPS. So ads.txt, even though you don't even realize it, it's using cryptography. If you pull it from HTTPS, DNS, as you mentioned, I think even though it's not cryptography per se, but it's a great tool, right, for trust. Yeah, so if you could tell me a little bit more. So that's kind of like OpenRTB, where we are today. Right? Basically, it's the Wild West when it comes to private data, and very limited when it comes to like supply chain verification. So what are some of like the big holes right now that you see, especially maybe you for AdNode, that you see currently in OpenRTB that perhaps ads.txt or even ads.cert may not be tackling, but that say something like AdNode can help with? And what are the limitations of today's usage of cryptography in OpenRTB?
Sorry, I don't have a good answer for that question. Currently, our product we're based on direct marketing, and then what we call programmatic preferred.
Cool. But and how do you use cryptography within AdNode? So I know we talked a lot about receipts, for example. What are some of the concepts that you use within AdNode?
Okay, that's a question I can answer. So as part of our platform, this is something Neil had spoke about earlier. There was no consent management system, so we actually did have to build our own as well, where you're able to tell AdNode, and it is through AdNode, it's through the platform, who you want to connect to and what data you want to share. All of the data on in our database, the entire database is encrypted. We encrypt data at rest and in motion. Everything, of course, is over HTTPS. That's all pretty standard now. Pretty much everyone's APIs is all run over HTTP, SSL, and then also the rise of cheap CPU cycles, inexpensive CPU cycles, and cloud computing is what's allowing us to now encrypt our entire data sets and databases. And we also, we have kind of this public and private side where we keep all the identities of our customers. Those are all kept private, and our validation data is kept on a permissionless public blockchain. So it's kind of a hybrid of the two. So you can think of our use of blockchain as more in the validation space.
You should talk to this part too for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's definitely a lot of. So for example, we use a lot of Merkle trees, Merkle proofs to prove inclusion and exclusion. Of course, with a shared ledger, you can prove computation. So those are, I think, our big advantages. And kind of to go back a little bit as to what are the limitations today. So, for example, with ads.cert, well, first of all, it depends on OpenRTB 3.0. Number two, only the buyers are able to validate the publishers, so you don't have end-to-end validation. So that's number two. Number three, you still have to trust somebody to do that verification, so they have to do it at every step, which, as opposed with like a shared ledger, is one implementation. So yeah, I think for us, like we love Merkle trees. Merkle trees are super awesome. But what are some some of the more advanced things, perhaps, that we can talk about? So for example, a snark, like snark, or multi-party computations. Kind of like, I think those are really cool because like you potentially. So when people say like distributed ledger technology, I kind of have a don't like that word, to be quite honest. I say shared ledger because you don't have to have a sufficiently distributed ledger to kind of provide that, and you can do that with, let's say, snarks, for example. So here, I'll bring it back. So do you think today, can we use cryptography to validate auction mechanics, for example? And how and why are there problems today with auction mechanics? How can we use cryptography to validate that? Yeah, just some thoughts about that.
I don't do the auction mechanics, so
Yeah. Okay, I know that's tough, but yeah. Okay, so basically, I think that that you can. So for we're talking with Facebook engineer that we can, for example, use a MPC, so it's a multi-party computation script to enforce auction mechanics. Of course, that's really slow, and so what we want to do is be able to enforce this using a shared ledger in cryptography. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what my thoughts are. So with that, let me open it up to the public. So let's take some questions from the public. Yeah, just throw out any questions about cryptography. I know there's some engineers here. Yeah, let's open it up. No questions or nothing? All right, so with that, let's do it. That's it.